Before you immerse yourself in tonight's terror, hit that subscribe button if you think you can handle even darker stories lurking in the shadows. I wasn't expecting much when I took the part-time job at the library. It was a small, quiet town, and I was looking for a little peace away from the chaos of the city. Honestly, I just needed a job to fill my evenings, and working in a library seemed like the perfect way to escape. Little did I know that my decision would lead me into a world I didn't fully understand. When I arrived that afternoon, the library felt strangely old but welcoming, with towering shelves and an atmosphere that seemed to hold the weight of years of stories. The head librarian, a stern figure, was tall, with glasses perched low on his nose. He handed me a set of keys, the metal cold in my palm, and a clipboard with my job duties written neatly in black ink. He didn't say much, just a quick glance at me before handing over the clipboard. "Take care of the library. Keep it neat and orderly. I'll be back in the morning," he said, his voice deep and steady. I nodded, trying to appear professional, despite feeling a little awkward in the unfamiliar surroundings. He gave me a curt nod, and then disappeared into the back room, the heavy door creaking shut behind him. And just like that, I was alone with the silence. The library was huge, far bigger than I had expected. It was divided into different sections, each one lined with rows and rows of books. I was tasked with shelving books, tidying up, and making sure everything was in its place. It seemed simple enough, so I set to work right away. As I moved down the aisles, I couldn't help but notice the books. So many of them, all lined up, waiting to be picked. I even paused a few times to read the titles, some of them intriguing enough to consider checking out when I had time. But it wasn't long before I noticed something strange. The library was too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt almost suffocating. The kind where you think you're alone, but you're not quite sure. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but there was nothing. The stillness was thick, almost pressing in on me. It was around my third hour on the job when I found something that didn't belong. I had just finished shelving a stack of books in the fiction section when I noticed a faint glow, a soft, eerie light pulsing from a crack between two large books. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but the glow persisted, almost like it was calling to me. I hesitated for a moment, then walked over, curious. I pulled the books apart carefully, not sure what to expect, but as soon as I did, the glow grew brighter. I felt a strange pull to the spot, like the library itself wanted me to find whatever was hidden there. I reached into the gap, my fingers brushing against something cold. There, in the dark space between the shelves, was a small, folded piece of paper. It hummed faintly in my hands, almost as if it was alive, vibrating softly against my fingers. The paper was old, its edges frayed as if it had been hidden for a long time. I unfolded it slowly, the soft rustle of the paper loud in the quiet space. The handwriting was neat but frantic, as if written in a hurry, with elegant loops that made the text almost hard to read. It was a list, a set of rules. Rule 1, never shelve books in alphabetical order. Rule 2, always carry a flashlight with you when the lights flicker. Rule 3, if a book falls off the shelf, put it back without looking at the front page. Rule 4, never check out the books with red covers. Rule 5, if a book appears in your bag, burn it before sunrise. I stared at the paper, trying to make sense of it. I thought at first it was just some kind of joke, maybe part of a book someone had left behind. But there was something about the way the paper glowed, the way it hummed softly in my hands, that made me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a prank. I stuffed the paper into my pocket, trying to push the odd feeling away, and continued my work. The library was still empty, save for the occasional visitor who came in for a book or two. I barely saw anyone, and the library seemed to have its own rhythm. The visitors would come, choose their books, and then leave, without much conversation. The stillness was almost comforting in its predictability. The first few hours of my shift passed without incident. I shelved books, helped a few patrons, and went about my duties. The library was as quiet as always, the kind of peaceful atmosphere that you'd expect from a place dedicated to the written word. The most eventful part of the evening was when I noticed the ID badge the head librarian had given me. It hung around my neck, resting against my chest, a small, flimsy plastic thing. It didn't serve much purpose, at least that's what I thought. I couldn't imagine it being something that would make a difference in the grand scheme of things. It was just a badge, after all, with no name on it, just an ID number that didn't mean much to me at the time. Around 9:30 p.m., I decided to take a break, hoping the shift would pass quicker if I stepped away from the books for a moment. So I sat by the front desk, scrolling through my phone. The screen was a small comfort, a distraction from the creeping unease that was slowly taking root in my chest. That's when I noticed the first visitor of the night. A middle-aged man, dressed in a long trench coat, was wandering through the aisles. There was nothing particularly unusual about his appearance, but his behavior was odd. He walked up and down the aisles, pausing at random shelves, inspecting the books, as though they were speaking to him. His eyes would linger on certain titles for far too long, his gaze intense, almost unblinking. He didn't come up to the desk, didn't ask for help, didn't even seem to notice I was there. He just wandered. I stood up from the desk, thinking I should check on him, make sure he wasn't lost or needed assistance. But before I could make my way over to him, he disappeared into the shadows between the aisles. I blinked, unsure if I had actually seen him move. One moment, he was there, and the next, he was gone. I didn't think much of it at first. People did weird things sometimes, especially when they thought no one was watching. It wasn't uncommon for someone to get lost in their own thoughts, to wander aimlessly when they thought no one was around. I shrugged it off, returning to my phone, trying to refocus on the quiet, normal night ahead. It wasn't long after the strange man disappeared that a few more patrons arrived, mostly regulars looking to read quietly. One woman headed straight to the fiction section, another man to the mystery aisle. The library felt calm again, the faint hum of pages turning and soft footsteps on the old wooden floors filling the air. Then the lights began to flicker. At first, I thought it was just a power issue, a simple malfunction that would resolve itself. But the flickering wasn't random, it was rhythmic, almost deliberate. The lights dimmed, then brightened again, flickering on and off in a steady pattern, like something or someone was controlling it. It wasn't the usual power surge. It felt intentional. I froze for a moment, watching the overhead lights pulse. And then I remembered Rule 2, always carry a flashlight with you when the lights flicker. I had stuffed my phone into my pocket earlier, but now I desperately fumbled to pull it out. My fingers were clumsy, my heart racing as I tried to unlock it. I could hear the faint hum of the lights above me, each flicker seeming to echo in the quiet library. Finally, my phone unlocked, and I turned on the flashlight. The light felt like a small comfort, but it also made everything seem more surreal. The shadows seemed to grow longer with every flicker, twisting and stretching across the floor. I had barely adjusted to the sudden change when the lights flickered again. This time I noticed something odd. A woman who had been seated at the table near the history section vanished. One moment, she was flipping through a book, and the next, she was gone. It was like she had been erased from the room. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but when I looked again, the seat was empty. I stood there, staring, unsure if I had seen what I thought I had. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it, but then the lights flickered once more. This time, it was a man near the mystery section. He had been intently reading a thick novel, but when the light flickered, he too disappeared. Not a word, not a sound, just gone. I could still feel the weight of his absence as if he had never existed. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I called out softly, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But there was no response. No one to answer me. The silence was thick, almost suffocating, and now the lights flickered again, faster this time. I turned, scanning the aisles, my flashlight cutting through the dimness. Another flicker, and a woman browsing the art section was gone, as if swallowed by the shadows. I felt the panic rising in my chest as the room became emptier with each passing flicker. I was alone, but I wasn't alone. The library felt alive, like it was shifting, pulling people into its depths one by one. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it, but there was nothing that explained what was happening. The rules from the note echoed in my mind. I was following the rules, but it didn't feel like it was enough. These weren't just random disappearances. They were happening in sync with the lights, like the flickering was a signal, a countdown. Flicker, person gone. Flicker, person gone. I checked the rules again, hoping they would make sense of what was happening. That's when it hit me. These weren't just rules from a book, they were real. I didn't know how or why, but I had to follow them. I had to survive. So I was shelving books in the horror section, just doing my usual routine, and then I heard something. It wasn't the usual hum of the lights or the sound of the air conditioner. No, this was something else. I thought it was a trick of my mind at first, but then it happened again. It was the sound of breathing. I thought I was imagining it, but as I got closer to the shelf, it got louder. It was coming from one of the books I just shelved. At first, it was soft, almost like a faint sigh, but then it was sharp, like someone was trying to catch their breath. I leaned in closer, trying to figure out what it was. I thought maybe it was a malfunctioning book or something, but no, this was different. It was like the book was breathing on its own. I pulled back fast, my heart was racing. I had to look away. There was no way that was normal, right? I mean, books don't breathe. I stood there for a second, just trying to wrap my head around it. I wasn't even sure if I should touch it again. It was like the whole library was a little off after that, like something changed. I stepped back, not sure if I should leave or keep going. But the thing is, I had this feeling, like the library was more than just a place with books now. It felt different. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew I needed to be careful. Later that night, a man walked in. He was older, probably in his mid-50s, with graying hair and thick glasses. He didn't ask for help. Didn't even glance at the shelves, really. He just headed straight to the horror section, like he knew exactly where to go. I watched as he pulled out this book. A deep red cover, almost like it was made to stand out. The moment I saw it, I felt this surge of cold panic, like something inside me screamed to stop him. I don't know why, but I had to say something. "Sir, I wouldn't check that one out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but my hands were shaking. "It's part of a restricted collection." But he didn't even blink. He didn't acknowledge me at all. He just slid the book into his bag like it was the most normal thing in the world, and then he walked to the checkout desk as if everything was fine. But I knew it wasn't fine. I could feel the chill creeping down my spine as I watched him leave. Something wasn't right. A few minutes later, I heard a loud thud coming from the back of the library. My heart skipped a beat. I rushed toward the sound, hoping it wasn't what I thought it was. But when I turned the corner, I found him. He was lying on the floor, his body completely limp. His face twisted in pain, his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. There was no breath, no movement. I froze, unsure what to do. And then, just as I was about to check if he was still alive, something horrible happened. His skin, it melted. It wasn't like he was dying slowly. It was like his body was being eaten away, dissolving right in front of me. His flesh turned to words. They floated up into the air, like they were being pulled back into the red book he'd checked out. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The room felt so cold, like the air itself was choking me. And that's when I realized those rules I found weren't just there to warn me. They were trying to keep me alive. I had no idea what I'd just witnessed, but whatever it wasn't over. The night dragged on, but I could feel the weight of every minute. The rules weren't just words anymore. They were my lifeline. It was like I had no choice but to follow them. I was barely holding it together, but I knew I had to. Every time the lights flickered, my heart would race. I couldn't let the flashlight go out, not for a second. I kept it with me, my fingers practically glued to it, just hoping the beam of light would keep whatever was in the dark at bay. The flickering lights, though, they weren't just annoying anymore. They were part of something bigger. They came faster now, pulsing in and out like they were trying to warn me, but also like they knew I had no choice but to stay. I couldn't ignore them. I couldn't even think about it. And the air, it wasn't just cold, it was suffocating, like something was pressing in on me, as if the walls themselves were closing in. At first, I thought it was just my nerves, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like the library was alive, like the books, the shelves, the very building were watching me, waiting for me to slip up. I kept telling myself to stay calm, but the longer I stayed, the harder it became. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to follow the rules. If I didn't, I couldn't even begin to imagine what would happen. And if I made one wrong move, one wrong decision, I wasn't getting out of there. By the time I'd started to understand the patterns in the library's strange behavior, I thought I had a handle on things. The rules were my compass, and as long as I followed them, I thought I'd be okay. But then, the lights began flickering again. This time, faster, almost like they were pulsing. It felt like the library itself was breathing. I glanced around, a sense of urgency rising in my chest. Rule 2 hit me like a punch to the gut. Always carry a flashlight when the lights flicker. I couldn't stand still, the pressure of their unblinking eyes making my skin crawl. I had to do something. I couldn't let the same thing happen again, not after what I had seen. Everyone, turn on your flashlights or your phones, anything that can light up. I shouted, my voice trembling but urgent. My mind raced, trying to stay focused. If they don't listen, they'll vanish like the others. I can't let that happen again. But no one moved. The patrons stood still, as though they hadn't heard me. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I ran toward the nearest aisle, trying to make eye contact with anyone who wasn't already in the middle of this nightmare. "Please, listen to me. Turn on your lights," I called out, hoping my frantic voice would break through the terror. I saw her then, a woman near the biography section. Her head was bent slightly, her posture stiff. Desperation surged within me. I ran toward her, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floors, praying she'd listen. "Please, turn on your flashlight," I yelled, reaching out to touch her shoulder. As soon as my fingers brushed her, she slowly turned her head. Not just her neck, but her entire head twisted 180 degrees, as if her body was a puppet on strings. Her face, it wasn't a face at all. It was a grotesque mask of hollow eyes, jagged teeth, and skin pulled too tight. There was nothing human about it. Panic exploded in my chest. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my throat. My hand shook as I fumbled for my phone. I dropped it. The flashlight cut out, plunging the room into darkness. I froze, my breath shallow and quick, my eyes wide, trying to adjust to the black void. Then, with a sickening synchronicity, every single patron in the library turned to face me. Their faces, elongated, twisted, like something out of a nightmare. Their eyes were wide and unblinking, staring right through me. The next thing I knew, the room was flooded with light. Every visitor had turned on their flashlight. The beams cut through the darkness, scorching my skin, but it wasn't the light that hurt. It was the way they stared, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I stood frozen, my body refusing to move as the blinding lights bore down on me. In that moment, everything I thought I understood about the library shattered. The rules weren't just warnings, they were survival instructions. I wasn't just trying to get through the night anymore. I had to escape, or I wouldn't make it out alive. I turned and bolted down the nearest aisle, my flashlight flickering with every step. The shelves behind me seemed to shift, groaning as if they were alive, closing in with each passing second. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my heart hammering in my chest. Footsteps echoed from behind me, slow and deliberate, like something was pacing me. The air grew colder, the tension thick and suffocating. It felt as if the entire library was closing in, and I was being hunted, not just by the twisted patrons anymore, but by the library itself. I darted down another aisle, my breath ragged in my throat. The shelves around me seemed to bend and twist like they were alive, moving in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving. I couldn't stop. And then crack. A sickening sound, like bones snapping. My blood ran cold. The noise came from behind me, but I didn't dare look. I just ran faster, my legs burning with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. The walls around me seemed to shift and close in tighter, trapping me further inside. The aisles were narrowing, and I could barely fit between the shelves. The library itself was trying to trap me. The sound of the shelves groaning was almost deafening, like they were alive, conspiring against me. My fingers trembling as I tried to call someone, anyone. But the signal was dead. I tried again and again, but there was no connection. It felt like the library was blocking everything. I cursed under my breath, feeling more isolated with each failed attempt. No one was coming to save me. I pushed past the reference desk, my eyes scanning desperately for an exit, but the walls seemed to close in faster. I couldn't see a way out. I had to get to the back door, the only way I could think of to escape. I stumbled, my flashlight flickering wildly, and in that instant the shadows seemed to grow darker, thicker. They were closing in on me, following my every move. I could feel them, pressing against me, suffocating me. The library was alive. It knew I was trying to leave. I had to get out, I had to. I was near the back of the library now, my breath ragged and shallow. The door was just ahead, but with every step I took, the space around me felt like it was shrinking. The walls seemed to pulse, tightening like they were closing in on me. The library wasn't a building anymore. It was something alive, something hungry, and I was its prey. Then I heard it, something scraping along the floor, a low, guttural sound like claws dragging across tile. It wasn't just close, it was getting closer. I whipped around, flashlight flickering wildly, and saw it. A dark shape moving through the aisles, silent but massive. Glowing eyes locked onto mine, burning with an unnatural light. It was stalking me, a presence so overwhelming it swallowed the room. Panic surged through me, and I bolted toward the door. My hand slammed against the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door, which had always opened with ease before, was now a solid wall. The library was locking me in. I turned toward the growing darkness, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The sound of the creature's footsteps rang in my ears, slow but inevitable. My heart was pounding, each beat louder than the last. I didn't know how much longer I could stand it. Suddenly, the room grew colder, the air thick with a suffocating pressure. I could feel it behind me, its breath hot and foul, brushing the back of my neck. My fingers fumbled with the door handle once more, my pulse racing. With a final, desperate yank, the door gave way, creaking open just enough for me to squeeze through. I burst into the night air, gasping for breath, my body shaking with adrenaline. I stumbled back, eyes wide, searching for any sign of the beast. But the shadow of the library stretched far behind me, dark and menacing. I could hear the faint sound of the books whispering, calling me back into its depths. I had escaped for now. I thought I was free. I thought the nightmare was over. But as I stood there in the cool night air, heart still racing, I felt it. A presence, heavy and unyielding, watching me from behind. My spine stiffened. I turned. The library door, the one I had just locked, was creaking open, slowly. Not from the wind, not from some malfunction. It was as if something inside was pushing against it, forcing it to reveal its dark secrets. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back, eyes wide, watching as the door inched open, revealing the faintest shape inside. Something large, something twisted, moving with purpose. Before I could even process what was happening, it emerged, a towering, grotesque figure. Dark, hulking, its eyes glowing like burning coals, flickering and alive. It was taller than any man, its body covered in thick, rotting skin that seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. Horns scraped against the ceiling, and its claws clicked against the floor with each step it took toward me. I was frozen. The library had sent this creature. It was the library's final command, its last desperate effort to keep me inside. My mind screamed, but my mouth was paralyzed, my voice lost to fear. The creature lunged, its claws reaching for me, and before I could even react, its grip tightened around my body, pulling me into the suffocating darkness of the library once more. I was dragged back in. The last thing I heard was the familiar eerie sound, the books, breathing, their whispers curling around me, telling my story as I was consumed by the shadows. And then, everything went silent. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe for more creepy tales. If you'd like to support the channel, consider buying me a coffee on Ko-Fi. Every bit helps. Links in the description.